Got a special episode today on the Men Are Forged podcast. I have the Storied Outdoors hosts, two of them. This is the first for me. If any of y'all have been listening to me for a while, I have two guests on, and I'm going to make sure I get this right. Brad Hill and Bryan Gill.
You did it.
I did it.
Nailed it.
You got it right. Nice. A little 2 for 1.
Yeah, there we go. Guys, so I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I love also just getting local people, Alabama guys. And so thank y'all for being here.
Man, thanks for having us.
Yeah, what an honor to join you, man. So thank you.
Absolutely. Are y'all Auburn or Alabama? Speaking of Alabama.
It's a house divided.
Oh, okay.
So I graduated Auburn, and Brad's been a lifelong Alabama fan.
I hear you. Okay.
Well, I think the fun thing is Bryan grew up as an Alabama fan.
I did.
And ended up going to Auburn.
Once I started
saved,
paying,
right?
Once I started paying tuition, I was like, you know what? I could root for this team.
Bryan, I'm in the same boat. I mean, both sides of my family are big Alabama fans. Actually, my grandfather, my mom's dad, his camp counselor was a guy named Paul Bear Bryant. So,
oh yeah.
So I was kind of
might have heard of him.
yeah. So I got brought into this family, and then I went to Auburn. And
I grew up, huge Alabama fan. I had all the things. My dad was an Alabama fan. I had my dad's best friend was friends with Bill Oliver. We had access to Gene.
Brother Bill.
Yeah, Brother Bill.
Which
Gene
was Bill on both
Stallings.
sides as well.
Exactly, right. And so I had all the memorabilia, the signed autograph footballs and all that. And, I went to Auburn, and Dad, I think that was heartbreaking to Dad.
So, yeah, well, so guys, this is like I said, is a first for me having two of you on there. So let's just kick it off with, for my audience, especially those who don't know about y'all's podcast, so tell me, what was the evolution? What's led to the two of y'all starting the Storied Outdoors? Yeah, who wants to start? Kick me off.
Go for it, Brad.
Well, my internet's being a little wonky, so I may have missed that question. So please forgive me. What would you restate the question?
Yeah. So what led to starting the Outdoor podcast, Storied Outdoors?
Yeah, great story. Like a lot of stories here and podcasts here lately, this began during the COVID lockdowns, and Bryan and I were able to go. Once things sort of lifted up, we went on a trip together to go find some trout in North Georgia. And while we were there, as we road tripped, we were listening to an audio book, but it was more of a collection of essays by a guy named John Gierak, who is an outdoor writer, really pithy, funny, but really clever way of telling stories, and they all revolved around fly fishing. So it was getting us in the mentality of we're going to go fly fishing. But we were thinking about the way that he wrote those, and Bryan was like, man, we could do something like that, but really wrap some of our personal reflections on faith and bring a faith aspect into where he's not really a believer. He's just an outdoors writer that's writing really great stories. And we wanted to bring in more of a faith aspect, but then do it in podcast form. Mm-hmm. And he's like, we should start a podcast. And then I was like, are you sure you want to do a podcast?
Do we need another podcast?
Do we need another podcast? You're going to have to really convince me.
Yeah.
So we did some research and started looking into what podcasts are out there that are doing what we want to do. And there were not very many of those. And so we felt like we sort of had a niche into our people and the message that we wanted to put out there as a podcast. There wasn't much like that out there for us in that market, especially within the outdoors market. It was kind of some extremes, I felt like, where it was all outdoors, it was all gear, it was all tool time with Tim, when it came to men stuff, and if it was Christian. And listen, I'm a pastor at one of the pastors at a church in Mobile. I I lead worship and I speak and do Bible studies and all that. A lot of the Christian Outdoors podcasts were very preachy, overly preachy. And frankly, to be real frank, cheesy. I just couldn't even listen to them.
Yeah.
And that's not what we wanted to be either. And so we wanted to find somewhere away from the cheesy, but real. We love storytelling, and we even fantasy, and our title gives it really broad parameters, so we can explore a lot of space within the title and the outdoors. So it's not just hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of that, man, that was Brian's genius. And I was like, there it is. I can do that. When it was like, here's what we're trying to accomplish. But yeah, there are a lot of podcasts, and there's a lot of content out there. And we were trying to find a way. What's something someone's not doing that we would like to do?
Yeah. So Brian, I mean, if you could kind of shed a little light on this, is like, I am very much, because I love y'all's podcast, is just the whole idea of the power of story and the power of the outdoors. And I think y'all's little subtitle, your little tagline hits on that. So if you would kind of share that with my audience, and also what that means to y'all.
Yeah, the tagline, it took a little bit of convincing for Brad on that one. It's an ambitious title, let me tell you. So we say that it's a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark. I love C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien. Grew up on those stories. Really just love the fact that how they throw so much depth into not just their nonfiction writing, but their fiction writing also. And just the quality of writing that they do is just something to aspire to do. But also the journeys of Lewis and Clark, and the way that they just set out and explored uncharted territories, and just the love of the outdoors, and the artfulness that they bring with storytelling, and their journals, and the drawings and illustrations that they brought back with them exploring this new land. And so when we say somewhere between these two guys,
nice and broad,
there are some aspects that we are very on the adventure side of that. And sometimes we throw in some more fictional and more story driven. So it fits in there nicely. It's two of our passions. It's the story and the outdoors. And so we are not claiming to be like any of those four men in any way, other than the fact that they are very aspirational in nature.
Gotcha. So I mean, just listening to Brian, would you agree with a lot of what he said, that was kind of your evolution in your mind?
Oh, man.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. That trip back, we were just brainstorming the whole time. And we actually started writing essays when we got back, and we realized, you know what, we got some stories that are like previous in our life. So that, in the last decade or so, that we could reflect on it. We actually didn't post our essays on that first trip to North Georgia. Was it that was in season 2, right, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we kind of wrote those first essays, and then we were like, you know what, we got to go back and catch up to speed on some of these prior experiences. So yeah, it gave us a really good opportunity to look at these stories. And from the beginning, Brad and I have said, this would be a treasure for us to have if our fathers would have done this.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so both Brad and I have young kids. And so if nobody listens to this podcast, our main goal is to have these documented stories that our children could listen to one day as a treasure.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. Unbelievable. So, I mean, on that note, I think that's a great transition. Just, and Brad, if you could kick us off, what was a adventure or a time outdoors from, adolescence or even young manhood that you really resonates with you, that you kind of still carry with you?
Oh man, gosh, it's really hard to narrow down an experience like that. And I've been thinking about that since you sent, that email and sort of asked that question. And what would I choose as something? Obviously, a lot of things transpired, within athletics, as a young kid, when it came to a lot of, even the other day, I was talking to a football coach that he had just listened to one of our episodes with Scott Goolsby, and how much he enjoyed that. And we were just talking about the impact of coaches, in a young man's life, and how I still remember tons of like little sayings that coaches would say. Like I had an offensive line coach that would always say when somebody messed up, he's like, man, you do it right, you do it light, but you do it wrong, you're going to do it long. And so you just never, never forget those, because you experience somebody messing up and you having to do that drill over and over and over until you get it right. And so there's this visceral pain and sorrow attached to that lesson that you never forget. And so a lot of memorable moments out there. I've written about some of them. I think one pivotal moment for me was more so in college than it was in my younger years, because I found myself leading worship for International World Changers in Kenya. I grew up in a small town, Alabama, in Monroeville, Alabama. My dad was a mill worker. My mom had a job. We were very well taken care of. I was extremely, extremely blessed by the parents and the home that I had. And I found myself face to face with real poverty. I remember distinctly, we were in Nairobi. We were staying outside of Nairobi, and we would come into Nairobi. And one of the things we did was we did some work with the street kids. Is what, it was the ministry that these kids that lived on the streets. And I'll never forget waking up these young boys who were asleep in a croaker sack. And I thought, why are these boys here? And why did I get to grow up where I got to grow up? And I just really came face to face with God. Said, I'm sovereign and I'm in control of all things. It's not a matter of they deserve that and you deserve where you live. It's a matter of my plans for them and my plans for you. And that's the way it is. And I have plans for them and I have plans for you. And one of them is for you to see them and to work with them, and for you to encourage the missionary that serves them, and for you to go home and tell people their story. And that trip changed me forever, because I saw what real contentment looked like.
Yeah.
We're doing some work in one of the largest slums in all of East Africa. These sweet, wonderful people live in these tin shanties, and they are as content as happy, and they praise the Lord and they worship. And
yeah. Right. So Brad, you were hitting on just being in East Africa, and how just contentment, that real contentment.
Yeah. And genuine contentment. I mean, by all, stretches of the imagination, they don't have what I grew up with, yet they seem to be more content than I remember seeing my parents,
Yeah.
And even I'm leading a team in a couple of weeks down to Mazatepe, Nicaragua, and addressing the question with them is, what is poor? What does it mean to be poor? What does it mean to be in poverty? Because we're all in poverty in some way.
Oh yeah.
Right. We're all broken, and we don't have what we need to save ourselves. We're all in poverty that way. We need Christ, every one of us. And so addressing that question and kind of dismembering what we think is poverty and what we think is poor before we go into a place and think we need to make some little Americans. Well, maybe they don't want to be little Americans. Maybe, maybe they are content. They don't need the white picket fence in the house and the, whatever the dream is that you name. Maybe they're very satisfied with what they have and where they are.
Maybe we could learn something from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. No question about it. And so, man, but that all for me, that really began and was a huge moment for me when I was in college working in Kenya. That was probably one of the bigger perspective, eye-opening moments for me as a minister and especially when it comes to missions and what I do as a missions pastor. It was one of the things that I do for my church.
Was that for you just a very catalytic moment of this is what I want to do the rest of my life, or was that something that kind of took shape later?
No, that reinforced something that was already there. I mean, I already felt called to ministry. I knew I wasn't I didn't feel like I was called to foreign missions, like internationally, but it did ignite a deep love for the short-term mission trip for me.
Gotcha. Huh. And how many mission trips do you take a year with your church?
Not too many here lately.
Oh yeah, the last 2-3 years, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Usually I get to travel at least 3 to 4 times a year somewhere. On if we're going on all cylinders, then we're rolling pretty good.
Gotcha. That's great, man. Well, thank you for sharing that, man. That's such a powerful. Yeah, I mean, I would say my similar experience traveling to third world countries and just realizing, man, these kids have so much joy and have so much less than I do.
Yeah.
It's just it's a weird paradigm for a Westerner to really kind of like bust our bubble a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, what about you, Bryan? Yeah. What's kind of something that happened to you, at a young age?
Man, it wasn't Nicaragua. It was Baker Hill, Alabama. My dad and I and my best friend Will Gaither and his dad Tommy, we went to we were at the hunting land, and I'd been saving up money to buy a pocket knife. There was this old country store that had a pocket knife in a glass case, and I saw it, man. I could not stop thinking about it. And so with my birthday money that I wanted to get, that was what I wanted to get. And so I bought it, got it, and we were going out to the hunting land. And, I don't know how old I was, probably 10, 11 years old, maybe 9 years old. I'm not sure. It was in that preteen age. And Will and I were sitting on the back of the pickup truck on the tailgate. And Dad and Mr. Tommy were going to go and scout out an area for a tree stand. And Dad said, you need to be careful with that knife, because we're going to be whittling on some sticks. We just wanted to cut on some sticks with that knife. He said, you need to be careful with that knife. But if anything happens, if you cut yourself, honk the horn and we'll hear you. This is before cell phones that, our cell phone was in a bag in the car, as a bag phone. And there was no service out there. And so we didn't have any walkie-talkies or anything. So honk the horn and we were going to, and Dad would come back and if something was wrong, leaving a couple of preteens out in the woods, that was our means of communication. So we're sitting there, and lo and behold, I cut my thumb. Yeah. I cut my thumb with the pocket knife. And at the time it was as if I was going to lose my thumb.
Yeah. Right.
I look down, I'm bleeding. Will looks down. He sees the blood. He jumps. He was so fast at the time. And he jumped into the front seat of the truck and he starts laying on the horn. I mean, it was in my dad's mind. I bet he thought they're getting attacked by some bears right now, because the way that we were acting, this was urgent. This was a serious moment. Somebody's cut their wrist. This is somebody's bleeding to death.
They're bleeding out, man.
Bleeding out, man. You got to get there. So, my dad, he was a good athlete back in the day. He was a former track star and middle linebacker. And the story goes from Mr. Tommy's perspective that Dad ran through a barbed wire fence and it just popped. I mean, the way that Dad hit it, it popped.
It's exploded.
And in my mind, I'm seeing this trail that Dad's just blazing through the pine trees and the woods to get back to us in a dead sprint. And, by the time he got back, the bleeding had stopped, And so I'm sitting there thinking, I never forgot that story. And from that point on, in my mind, Dad was going to take care of it. He was going to take care of me. He was going to move heaven and earth to make sure I was safe. I was okay. he was my protector. No matter what obstacles were in his way, he was going to take care of it. And so that was my view of my dad from then on. I mean, at an early age, preteens, until he passed away a few years ago, he was a machine. I mean, nothing could stop him. Nothing was going to break him. Nothing was. He was stronger than anybody. In my mind, that was my dad. And I guess 2 lessons I learned from that was, one, probably preteen and maybe a little bit too young to leave 2 kids unsupervised with a pocket knife. And then the second one is, good daddies do whatever it takes for their children. That's, I think that good dads don't get praised enough for the sacrifices that they make for their children. We always hear the stories of the dads who are deadbeats and who dealing with some issues, but man, it was nice to have a dad that I knew was going to be my protector. And thinking forward a little bit, I may be jumping the gun a little bit, but I think that's what was really hard, and it still continues to be hard on the other side of not having my dad, is who is that person for me? Who do I look to for safety? And it comes down to this, the Lord, because I've taken on that role now for my family, and when you go home, subconsciously, whenever your dad's in the house, everything's okay because he's your protector.
That's right.
Well, when I go home now, I don't have that. My mom has been remarried and he's a great guy. And I love Tim to death, but it's a different mindset that I knew my dad had my back, and now I'm that guy. And that's a shift in thinking that the buck doesn't stop with anyone else. It stops with me. I'm the front lines.
So are you saying that you feel like even as an adult man that we still need that man we look up to or find some level of safety? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, granted, we have to take on that role of being that provider and that person who people look to as safety. But I think men need other men in addition to their fathers to help along this journey. I mean, there are gaps that other men in my life filled that my dad didn't fill. I mean, my dad didn't know everything about photography or woodworking, but I had men in my life like Mr. Sled and Mr. Noblet and Will Gaither's dad, Mr. Tommy, fill those gaps where dad, he just didn't have all the knowledge. I knew that my dad was filling his role and doing it well as a father, but having these other men in our life helps to shape us in areas where, maybe your dad may fall short. Your dad might not be an outdoorsman. Well, there are other dads who are, and there's no shame in another dad saying, "Hey, help me out in this. I may not know everything about this." There are men that knew a lot more about money than my parents, and so I've had to lean on them as an adult to say, "Hey, what do I do in this situation?" Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be, even as adult men, that we look up to.
Yeah. So, I mean, Brad, I think I liked your take on this as well. But Bryan, like from what you said, it sounded like because you had that safety of your dad, that even did you feel as a young man and even now in adulthood that you felt the really the safety to take risk. I think that's a lot of my audience as young men is they're not willing to learn to fail. I mean, I think of from my podcast, just all my people I've interviewed, like the model of success is falling forward, learn as you go. And so, for you, was that, because you felt that security with your dad, that you felt that the more permission to go for it and see what happens?
Yeah, to some extent. I wouldn't say always, and simply because, with risk, there's some financial responsibility with that.
Yeah.
We didn't have enough money to make mistakes. We didn't have enough money to fail a whole lot. So it was kind of like, there's a level of risk that if it didn't involve like financial burden that you could take, but having financial stability it limited our risk a little bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. But I mean, I think so yeah, when you stepped in your 20s and your adulthood, did you feel more permission to pursue the thing, like even just writing a book? I mean, that's just something that is, I think most men feels that's a scary endeavor, just going for that.
Yeah. And I think that having that security with my dad and knowing that he was a rock, um, allowed me to know, um, have the confidence, not necessarily to maybe to do things that maybe a little bit risky, knowing that my confidence didn't come from the things that I did, but who I was and whose I was. I was my father's son. I was his only son, and and knowing who I am in Christ, and knowing that my confidence is more than what I do. Absolutely, take risks, and you put yourself out there because there's something inside of you pushing you to do these things and pushing you to get this, whatever it is, into the world, whether it's your skills, your abilities, your talents, all of these things. God's given you those things to use, not just to hoard. And so taking that risk and having that confidence that, yeah, maybe if you do fall, your family's still going to love you, and you're not going to be defined by those failures.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, yeah, I think that that language in itself is, too many times when we fail, we take it to heart, we take it to identity versus just taking it to our behavior of like, hey, what did I learn from this? And I think that's
Right.
so valuable, Bryan. I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah. So Brad, what about you? I mean, how is that in your 20s? You feel like you've grown by pursuing and really found kind of a lot what Bryan said, of just discovered more of whose you are and who you are.
Yeah, I was, as he was talking, I was certainly thinking about, because pretty close in time, our fathers passed away. So we entered into a new stage of life together, as
Yeah.
our dads passed on to go be with the Lord. And now we are those men. And I certainly resonated with that comment of when I go home, it's not as restful as when Dad was there,
Yep.
because like you enter into his home, and he's the one that's his domain, that's his place that he's protecting, and he's got the answers for, and he's the problem solver, he's the fixer, all of those things. And now I remember distinctly, who is that now when he's gone? And ultimately, you're right, Bryan. We look unto the Lord, because that's where help comes from. But we are those men. That's that sort of initiation almost, because like now that safety net has been removed.
Yep.
But I'm thankful for those, lots of words of all the things my dad did. Not awesome. He did one thing really great, and that was he always let me know how proud he was of me. And I'm forever grateful for that, because like even when I messed up or I made mistakes, like that had no bearing on whether or not he was proud of me. And so that understanding of what you're saying, like whose I was, right? I was his son and he was proud of me. It didn't matter what, I was his son. That was why he was proud of me, not because I achieved this or I achieved that, but because he loved me and was proud of me. And so knowing that, I was willing to try things, because I knew whether I messed up or not, that didn't have any bearing on whether or not when I came home, my dad was going to hug me and love me. Right.
Yeah.
And so his willingness to show that kind of love and speak those words of affirmation really empowered me, to be a musician. One of the things I did for years was I traveled and made music. And, that was something he loved, and that was probably one of the other things I thought of that probably shaped me as a young musician. And that was, Dad loved to sing. He was a big man. Even in death, I felt small next to him. His hands still seemed massive, just these huge, manly mill worker hands. But he sang in church choir, and he taught me that like that's not unmanly, right? To stand and sing, that's not a feminine thing. That's okay. And so I began to sing in choir with my dad because my dad was willing to go sing in choir and in church choir, and that led to me, being a worship pastor, and that empowered me to stand before the church and to lead songs, to lead praise and worship. And that wasn't not thinking, because a lot of times, guys at the high school or whatever, oh, you sing, that's, that's not manly. You don't get that connotation. But he dismantled that completely because he was the manliest dude I knew. And then if you wanted to grab him, you better buckle up because he was a man's man. I mean, he worked at a paper mill for 20 years and all the strength that you need to do that and to open up valves. There were all kinds of stories about him being this ridiculously strong man. He was a man's man, but he didn't care about what other people thought about. He loved to sing. And so that certainly had a profound effect on whether or not I sang and didn't mind singing. And so now, as a worship pastor, that's been my career. I traveled and played music for years as a musician, leading worship all over the country. And ultimately, that's what led me to Kenya. That was one of the things that led me there was I was leading worship for that mission trip. And so it's those things that empowered me to not fear failure. As gosh, that's gonna, like you said, define me.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't define me. I'm defined by who I am in Christ ultimately, but I was defined by, as a small kid, my dad loves me, and I'm willing to try this because I know that's not gonna, whether I'm good at it or not, he doesn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all are kind of shaping this interview here when y'all just hammering fatherhood, because I think this might be the missing piece I think it is. I think a lot of what ails our world today is fatherlessness, right? And so, yeah, I mean, my question kind of really is, how old were y'all when you lost your dads?
It was 2018 for me.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been 3 years.
Oh, wow, man. So fairly recent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how have y'all felt the importance of fatherhood in your own kid's life? And really also just, maybe for the people out there, the men out there that haven't had a strong father figure in their life, or like Brad, you were saying, like your dad really kind of defined masculinity, and he got to kind of poked holes in those stereotypes, So, yeah, how do y'all see the importance of, Bryan, I'll let you go first, just of fatherhood and what it means to you and what we could do to encourage men to step into their place as a father.
Yeah. I think that this idea of masculinity has gotten skewed by our culture. And this idea of the alpha male is definitely skewed. In my opinion, the alpha male is the one who looks after the pack, and he's putting others first. It's the sacrificial type of mentality that is doing everything he can for the good of others. When we look at this definition of alpha male in our culture, it's like so self-serving and just a bunch of self-glorifying behavior that I think is just totally counter to what it should be. If you're the head of your household, you should be the lead servant of your household. You should be the one that is putting others' needs before your own, and that's the model we have in Jesus. Yeah. Jesus, I am the Alpha and the Omega. He is the alpha male, and he was the most self-sacrificing person in history of the world. So, I mean, this idea of fathers being an image of God, and so that means that we as fathers should be sacrificing for our families, should be sacrificing for those in our community, should be loving people to the point of our needs are taking second place in opposition to the needs of our family. And I saw that early with my mom, with my dad. My dad worked construction. He was working with International Paper. He was climbing the ladder. He was really doing a lot at a very young age, and had a very promising career within that field. He traveled a lot, and so he was gone a lot of the time. And so for the first 4 years of my life, I don't have a whole lot of memories of my dad. And my sister was 4 years older than me, and so she didn't have a whole lot of memories of dad in those first 8 years. We were in Arkansas, and there was a tent revival. And I accepted Christ at a tent revival in Arkansas because my dad was on we had moved there for dad's work. But dad wasn't at that tent revival. He was not there to witness me accepting Christ. I came home and told him about it. And I think that at that moment, he kind of had an aha moment that, look, my life is passing by without me being a part of it. And my children are growing up without a dad in the home because of how much he had to travel. Well, they spent the next few weeks and few months praying about what to do about their future. And dad gave up a $60,000 a year pay cut to become a part-time mailman in Eufaula, Alabama.
Oh, wow.
So that he could be with his family whenever he got off work. He wasn't having to work shift work. He wasn't having to travel. And that sacrifice that he made for his family was one of my earliest experiences with what it really means to be a man, what it really means to be a dad, and what it means to put your family first. It was funny, later in life, Dad and I were working on a sink together at our house. And he said, I never told you what it was that made me quit my job. I said, yeah, you did. You told me it was because you want to be with my sister and me and watch us grow up. He's like, yeah. But there was a moment that happened, and I never told you about it because I've been nervous to tell you about it the whole time. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, what is he about to tell me? And so we're sitting there, and he said, I drove into our house, and I saw you playing catch with your mom in the backyard. And before I got out of the truck, I just watched you. And I realized that you threw like a girl.
Brad, you knew it was coming, didn't you? I saw your face.
And he said, the reason that you did was because your mom was the one teaching you how to throw a ball. And that's not her role. It was my role, and I wasn't doing it because I wasn't there. So at that moment, I made it clear that I needed to be a part of my son's life. Now, granted, let me tell you this. My mom is an angel. She's a saint. But that was not her role. She was filling a gap that she wasn't supposed to be filling. She can't be a daddy and a mommy at the same time.
Yeah.
That was my dad's role. And praise God for women who stand in the gap.
Yeah.
I can attest that Bryan no longer throws like a girl. So
we got that clear. That's good.
I think we worked it out. Yeah. But no, that was a pivotal moment in my life. Yeah. Not from the time I was 5 years old till the time I was 35 years old. Mm-hmm. It was a span of 30 years that I had no idea what that story was. But all I knew was that my dad took his dreams and aspirations, put them on the back burner for his family. And who knows where I would have been if he had not.
That is like, God, that sounds so rare today, Bryan. I mean, because I think there is even still a messaging today of, to be a father is provision is number one. You got to provide your family, and everything else gets sacrificed. And men, we can kind of morally posture our own ambitions, our own dreams, just in the name of that.
Yep.
And really, it's not true at all. Just
be there, show up. Your family, money and all that stuff is good. You can survive on a lot less than you think you can. Mm-hmm. What you can't survive on and what you can't replace is that presence of your dad.
Yeah. 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 I guarantee you, he wasn't regretting spending more time with you and your sister.
Man, we fished every week. He only missed one football game my whole life. I mean, it was just a complete 180 from where he was headed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's great, man. Yeah. So what about you, Brad? Yeah. What does fatherhood mean to you? And what message would you share with all those young fathers out there?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I was waiting on it. I knew the punchline. I was just kind of holding it together, waiting on Brian's punchline of, I knew he threw like a girl and his dad had to repair that. I love that so much. Yeah. As one of my parts of my job is, I'm transitioning from more of a worship pastor out of that into family ministries and do a lot of concentration on men's ministry and what does that look like. So this is certainly a conversation that resonates with me. And one of the things, one of my elders that I work with and that's on our team has really sown into me, and then I'm continuing to sow into, and if I could tell anything to young fathers, and that's the two most important things you can offer is a safe place for your children and your presence. If you can be present and be safe, you're going to do okay. If you can accomplish those two things, a safe place for them to come ask questions, a safe place for them to come say, hey, I confess, and you not lose it, because they sinned or whatever. That you can be a safe place that they can come and they're not worried when they come into your presence, that, there's, the hammer is going to drop, that dad is safe. Mm-hmm. And then he's there. You have to be present to be safe. If you're not around, then it's not safe. And so those are two things that I really try to impress on all my guys. And, if you're chasing the job ladder, it's really difficult to be present.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask the question, what's important? I mean, you have to ask that priorities question. What's important? Am I going to be present or am I going to provide? Well, the ultimate provision comes from the Lord. And like you said, I learned pretty quickly early in my career of music, like you can, what you think you need and what God thinks you need are two ginormously different things. And I've certainly learned that in third world countries as I've traveled around the world. You can live on a lot less than you think you can and survive, and ultimately will be much stronger and better for it. A soft, comfortable life doesn't make hard, forged men. I say that.
That's good.
Yeah.
It certainly.
Man, probably when Brad's making a good point.
No, man. There it is.
There you are. You freeze up right at that end, but I think we got most of it. But
yeah.
I appreciate you dropping the word forged in there too, right?
Yeah, I was gonna share with you 4 times a year our men gather at our church. Just the men gather for a time of worship, prayer, and praise and testimony, and we call that forge. 4 times a year we gather together, and those are our forge gatherings where men share their stories of how they're being forged. And so I love that idea, and that imagery is beautiful.
Yeah, hammered, shaped by fire.
Yeah,
and heat.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. Softness is not gonna help anybody.
Yeah.
Sitting around in the air conditioning all the time, you're not gonna develop any calluses. Something I heard earlier. You were talking about masculinity. Today I was listening to, I don't know if you've seen this, John Tyson's book, The Intentional Father. I just got a hold of that, and I've been reading through that because something that, as I do men's ministry, something that really I'm focusing on and reading a lot on lately is this idea of rites of passage and initiation into what does it mean to be a man. And I heard Tyson, he was on the Art of Manliness podcast. And he said they said something in the conversation that I thought was really good, talking about what does it mean to be a man and masculinity. That masculinity, all young boys have that developing in them when testosterone's firing and you have all this stuff going on inside of you, and you don't know how to do that, or how to channel that energy, or how to channel those feelings that you have, or those desires that you have. And being a man is taking that electricity and channeling it correctly. Taking this power that's been put in you that you don't know what to do with, and being a man is channeling that the right way. And I was like, I really, really like that idea of like, how do we channel this? Because I mean, I see that in my own son. I have an 8-year-old little son, and as he gets older, he gets aggressive. Girls don't get aggressive. They come give hugs. My son comes up to me and is like 1-2 punching me, man.
Right hook.
Girls don't do that. So boys are, they're constantly developing that, and there's this energy inside them. And so to be a man, is channeling that. And how do we channel that well? And so that was something I heard literally yesterday, and I was like, man, that is so good. But that's certainly been a book I think is worth reading. I've really enjoyed so far, and it's going to be a resource that I think I pass on to a lot of my guys, is the Intentional Father by John Tyson.
Yeah, because I think there's something you mentioned, the channeling part, because Bryan, you hit on earlier, just like our culture is go all in on your instincts and what this kind of alpha male mentality, therefore AKA don't channel it or completely dismiss it or like push it down, suppress it. And there's not a lot in between, but I think that's just a great definition, that being a man is actually channeling it, learning how to value kind of the hold that intention and use it in its appropriate place. That's really good.
Yep.
Yeah. So Bryan, I would love to hear, speaking to that, what made you get into writing? What made you an author?
Man. It's funny. I hated to read growing up. I could not. I was guilty. And the reason is I was a slow reader, and like everything was like focused on how many books you could read. And, I filled up the Pizza Hut bucket stickers like once in my life. That's like all the books I ever read was on one sticker, and I got one free pizza. But I wasn't good at it. So therefore I didn't like it. And every evaluation that I ever took was like, I wish I could be a better reader or writer. And like, I would put that on for every grade, I would put that. And because I liked the thought of it. And it wasn't until I got, I guess around 9th or 10th grade, I had an English teacher. He taught American Lit, Mr. Pinage. And man, he put a love of reading good books into my life. And I started understanding kind of, okay, there's more to this than just words on a page. Some of these were allegories. Some of these were speaking to social issues. And, just kind of being able to experience the world through story was something I had always enjoyed. That was a part of growing up, is storytelling. You talk about a hunting trip, or you go on a fishing trip, and you'd always retell the story. We'd sit around fires or fireplaces. Brad and I have talked a lot about that, but story was always a part of my life, and I loved telling stories. And so it wasn't really until college or even grad school that I started putting those words to paper, pen to paper, on just retelling of these stories. Because people, that was kind of something fun we would do at lunchtime in college, and we'd all get around the caf, and I would tell stories to all my friends, and I'd get them laughing. And I started thinking, well, maybe people enjoy these things. And so what if I wrote them down? So I started writing some of these things down. And once I got into grad school, the man named Calvin Miller, who is a phenomenal writer, he's passed on now, but he kind of took me under his wing and started to mentor me and my writing, and showed me that I actually may have a little bit of skill here that he could help hone. And so he gave me a lot of feedback, and just really encouraged me. There was a few things that he told me that made me a better writer. He was never critical, like overly critical about it, but he would say things in a loving and kind way that kind of would guide me to be a better writer. And then a couple of people, Andy Blanks, we've had him on our podcast before. He kind of went out on a limb and asked me to write a book with him, I guess about 13 years ago. And so I wrote a devotional book for teenagers. And then a couple of years later, he asked me to write another one. And then it kind of moved towards fiction somewhere, I guess about a decade ago. And I still write devotionals. I still do things that are nonfiction, but the fiction part is really what's I'm passionate about, is because I love to tell the stories. I love to make up a story and write it down and try to find these connecting points from the characters and then the settings, and then put these, build the suspense and intrigue about it. So it's been a long time coming, but I've still got a long way to go. I still, what we had Charles Martin on our podcast, and he said, I'm a better rewriter than I am a writer.
Yeah.
And I can really resonate with that I'm a better rewriter than writer. So yeah, I really enjoy it. I think that the gift of writing is the desire to write. I don't think that, I think that makes, there are people who just cannot stand the thought of sitting down and writing. But then I think, man, that sounds like an amazing day for me. So I think that the gift is actually the desire.
Yeah. And you hit on something, just kind of been the theme from our episode here is, I'm very similar way. Didn't like reading, was told I wasn't very smart or articulate. And so like writing or, anything like that. And therefore it creates a narrative in your head. But then you resonated one with story, you love story, but then also you had a male figure come alongside you and like mentor you in that. And sometimes we need that, like going back to fatherhood, someone to stop those narratives in our head, these belief systems we create of ourselves outside of what God has for us. So, man, that's really good. That's interesting about writing too. Golly, it's never the first copy. Is like I think that's the biggest lie anyone has, is like you got to like write it the first time has to be great, and it's like it's so far from reality.
I'm reading Anne Lamont's Bird by Bird right now, and she has a lot to say about that. It's she calls it S word crappy first issue, first copies. So yeah, it's funny. She's a hilarious writer, but yeah, read that book if you're interested in writing. It'll make you feel better about yourself.
Yeah, good. Well, Brad, let me just kind of put it to you and your profession. What got you into worship leading? And you mentioned about your dad, then you also mentioned about missions. But yeah, what got you into just being full time working for a church?
Yeah. So. As a young senior in high school, I remember there was a weekend retreat that I was attending, and I saw there was this guy, Michael John Clements. If anybody ever ran into Michael John, was leading worship, and I thought, that is the coolest thing I have ever seen. I grew up in Eastwood Baptist Church. There were no guitars on Sunday mornings at Eastwood Baptist Church. There was a piano and an organ, and then all of a sudden there's this dude playing this awesome looking guitar.
I bet they had some singings.
So we had some singings. We had singings. And Dad would sing his special. He would have his tape, his tape accompaniment and stuff. But then all of a sudden there's this guy at this youth thing, and he's playing a guitar. He doesn't need an accompaniment CD. He's got his guitar, and he accompanies himself. And I thought, oh, I like that. That's cool. I wonder if I could do that. Mm-hmm. And man, I did. Coming back to this, this theme of people that's speaking into you. There was our youth and music minister at the church. Man, he stoked that fire, and I ended up playing music, and I would accompany him. So when I learned how to play guitar, he would give me these songs that he wanted to sing, and I would learn those songs, and then he would lead the songs, and I would accompany him for our youth gatherings on Wednesday nights. And that's where I began to sort of cut my teeth on leading worship, was watching him lead and how he led and how he transitioned between songs and how he got people to sing. And so Chris Whitey, who's a pastor now up in the Birmingham area and still a dear friend, was one of those people that really heavily influenced me and to what it means to lead worship and to pastor, and to the way he shepherded me and discipled me in that direction. And that was probably one of the early catalysts, for me, becoming what it means to be a worship pastor now, which is a lot different than what it used to. There's music minister and then there's worship pastor. And so I definitely lean more towards the pastoral work than I do. I mean, my degree is not even in music. I got a BA in Christian Studies from the University of Mobile. And I wanted to learn how to study the Bible, and I figured I would figure the music out later. And so that's what I've been doing. So I really I put a lot more effort in being pastoral than being musical.
Yeah.
There are a lot of musicians that are much better than I am. I don't really spend as much time doing that anymore as I do. I really care about shepherding people.
Yeah. And what made you, where'd you find that itch of wanting to be with, as like you said, shepherd and pastor?
I traveled and played for years with a band, with a group of guys, and that's how Bryan and I actually met. I was leading worship for a camp, and Bryan was preaching years and years ago, and almost 20 years ago, Bryan.
20 years ago.
Whoa. We became fast friends and lifelong friends, and have remained connected for all those years. I sang in Bryan's wedding. But yeah, traveling around from church to church, and I got to sample a lot of churches, from First Baptist Dallas to Podunk, Baptist Church in, wherever, name the smallest town, and I've probably played in one like it for a disciple now, So we've been all over creation leading, and so I got to sample a lot of churches and a lot of pastors, and I started to see the most effective guys were the guys that did care about being with people and shepherding people. And then through that process, I was leading worship when I was at home for the church that I work for now. So I've been a part of this church, Mars Hill Church, for 18 years this year. I led music for the first service that had music, and stuck around in a lay position as I traveled and played, and really developed a heart for these people here at this congregation of folks, and have been learning how to pastor by being their pastor, one of their pastors here.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I really kind of want to just close out. Well, really, I got a couple things, but, I would love just to hear a recent adventure y'all went on together, something that y'all wrote about, or maybe want to point to a bigger episode on your podcast for my listeners.
Brad and I have had some good trips, and we've had some trips where everything did not go right. And,
which is more adventure, right? That's how you classify adventure, right?
Yeah, that's cool and all, except when you're in the midst of it.
Yeah.
It's good reflecting on it.
Trips are the ones you remember, the ones where everything goes wrong. Every now and then you'd like one to go right, though.
Yeah. I'd like to catch a fish every now and then.
Yeah.
If I'm going on a fishing trip.
Oh, man. What'd you catch? No. Time.
Yeah. Oh, man. I don't know. Brad, which one do you think we ought to talk about?
I mean, we could foreshadow the introduction of the coming up season, which I'm super excited about. I was looking back at the people that we have that are joining us, and some of the essays that we've talked about. So yeah. I'm excited about the upcoming season. A little shameless plug for the new season coming out. I've been so impressed over the course of our adventures, what we've discovered about our own state. That would be something that I would say. You think when people hear fly fishing, they think, oh, you have to go, to Wyoming, or you have to go to Montana to experience fly fishing.
Or to the Smokies even.
Or to the Smokies. And that's just not the case. There's so much fun and recreation to be had here in our own state with a fly rod in your hand. It's unbelievable. One, because we have one of the most diverse fisheries in all of the country here in Alabama. But there's some really cool places in this state from top to bottom. There's some really interesting spots if you go looking. And recently we were able to go. The most recent experience and adventure we had was up in North Alabama with a good pal of ours, godly, wonderful man, Wade Blevins is his name, and he took us fishing for smallmouth in an undisclosed location somewhere between here and Tennessee.
That's how he blindfolded us and made us sign a waiver not to tell it the location.
Yeah, there was a non-disclosure agreement signed under pain of death. No, but it was incredible. It was just this. I couldn't believe it. We were standing in this beautiful stream, and we caught these these amazing fish, and there were some fun stories that happened, and that was cool because that was a result of the podcast. We would have met Wade outside of doing the podcast. He friend of a friend, and we ended up connecting with Wade, and he has this amazing ministry, and he invited us up there, and we just had this spectacular. That was a great trip. That was one of those that was so much fun. I'm not going to tell all of it. It wasn't completely awesome. If you listen to the first episode, we'll share why it wasn't completely awesome, but it was still great.
It was really close to being awesome.
It was, real close.
Yeah, and there was another story that Brad and I went on last October.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Man, we went to we had very big aspirations of hiking 7 miles on Hazel Creek to go do some overnight camping and fly fishing up in the Smokies. And man, it was a series of unfortunate events. Everything in the world that kept us from that trip happened. It took Brad how many hours to get from Mobile to here? 9 hours?
Yeah, it was a lot. He
was stuck on the interstate for 5 hours.
Yeah, there was this huge car accident that involved fatalities and a whole investigation that we were parked on the interstate for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, it literally took me almost 9 hours to get from Mobile to Birmingham to Brian's house.
And then we had a hurricane. Was it Delta that was coming up through the Alabama? And so, once we got to Birmingham, we were meeting up with our friend Richie, who then we were going to go drive the rest of the way up to East Tennessee to drive the rest of the way the next morning. We got up there around Fort Payne at like midnight, and we're thinking, guys, we got to go to sleep. So we pulled off at our my wife's family has what we call the old fish camp.
The old fish camp
in Fort Payne, Alabama. And so we were like, let's just spend the night. Let's get up at 3 a.m. and drive the rest of the way in the morning. So we get up, we grab just a little power bar or something like that. We're going down the mountain. And once we hit the railroad tracks, I hear this ka-thunk, 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 ka-thunk underneath the car. And I'm like, I need to pull over and see what this is. So I pull over, I look under the front side, and it started again after I left. I didn't see anything, so I left. And then it started again. And Richie says, Brian, I think it's coming from the back. So I pull over into the police station parking lot because nothing's open 3:30 in the morning. Fort Payne, Alabama. And so I look in the back, and the shock has come off of the bar that's connected to the axle, and it's just hitting the tires. It goes around and round and round. And I look at it, I'm like, boys, we ain't going anywhere.
Mm-mm. It rubbed a groove in the inside of the tire too.
Yeah.
So it just like removed like a inch wide rubber.
Yeah. So it was, we were close to having a full blowout if we would have gotten on that interstate. Mm-hmm. So we go back to the cabin and spend the night, get a good night's sleep. Richie does some research online of where to find this part, and he found this forum. It was like, well, if you go to your hardware store, you can get a number 6 bolt, this, that, and other, and some Loctite and fix it. And we're like, well, okay, well, $5.68 later, we fixed the vehicle, but
and changed the tire.
And we changed the tire, yeah. But it was a wash. But what that did, in hindsight, we started exploring Little River Canyon up in Fort Payne, Alabama. Mm. We did some fishing up there, found some red-eye bass, found some really good sunfish. And let me tell you, the scenery, it was as if we were in the Smokies.
Yeah, October, leaves are changing.
If you were to take a picture in Little River Canyon in October like we were, and tell somebody that they were in a gorge in Tennessee somewhere, they believe you. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was incredible. But going back to what Brad said, getting to explore our own state and understanding the biodiversity that is right here at home, if we just get out there and look for it, that was a treasure. And that was a trip that nothing went right, but then ended up having a great trip. And some really great memories come out of that.
Yeah, I mean, that hurricane passed over too.
Yep.
It dumped so much water, and we went back up to Little River Canyon, and boy, you want to talk about spectacular. That waterfall coming down at that. There's a national preserve there. I didn't even know that was there. And there's this huge waterfall, and boy, there was some serious water going over that waterfall, and it was really pretty special. So
we covered that.
A treasure.
We covered that episode in more detail in one called "The Best Laid Plans of Mice and Men." That's in. So you can look that one up on our podcast website.
Absolutely. So yeah, I would love for y'all just give a plug, maybe a little. I mean, you gave a little bit of a teaser of what's to come, but just where people can find it, and yeah, maybe something a little bit more of a little bit of teaser of what's to come. So.
Yeah, I mean, best place to find the podcast, really, all things podcast for us is our website, www.thestoriedoutdoors.com. And so you'll find episodes and, episode notes and photos. And one of the things Bryan and I love is photography. So any of our adventures that we take or we talk about in an episode is usually going to have a gallery of photography, of wildlife photography, pictures of fish and so forth. And so that's something that we love to do and to put those up. And so you can find everything you need to know there, but you can follow us on Instagram. That's where we do a good bit of our promotion on Instagram. But if you search outdoors on iTunes, we're probably the third or fourth hit on iTunes when it comes to outdoors. And it looks like there's a patch and it just says the Storied Outdoors and it has a little tent. I love the little tent that's it's really a book turned upside down.
Yeah.
But it looks like a tent and a book all at the same time. And so that's something that's part of our love is bringing in these stories, bringing in these quotes from different authors that say something, and we riff on whatever it is that they're having to say. And yeah, those are probably the best places to go and to find the Storied Outdoors.
As far as a little peek into the season, we've got some phenomenal guests, and I don't want to tip my hand too much, but each season has gotten better and better and better. And we keep finding these incredible guests who are willing to share their time and their stories with us. And if you're in the fly fishing world, there's going to be some people that are just, you're not going to want to miss these episodes. And so also, we're going to be doing another trip together, a couple of trips this fall, and, barring any breakdown in vehicles or hurricanes or interstate problems, but there are going to be some fun recaps and a couple of essays of adventures that we've had this previous year. I took my wife fly fishing for the first time. That's going to be a full episode in itself, talking about these men who stand in the gap. That's going to be an episode that I'm writing that reflects. I took a trip to New York, and I did a 40-mile bike ride through the city with a guy who was a mentor of mine, and reflecting on that male influence of men in your life that fill these gaps. And so that's going to be a fun essay to kind of recap the story, but also these past reflections. So we do a mixture. We do these essays where Brad, he has such a good reading voice. He reads them, and then we'll have these interviews with these incredible people that are fun to listen to.
Yeah. That's great. All right. Well, one more question I do want to ask both of y'all is, so what, being in my audience is kind of that guy in his late 20s, figuring out his life, career. What advice, what would you tell yourself that you know now? What would you tell your 25-year-old self that you know now?
I've been thinking about that because you mentioned that in some of our prep material. I think what I would tell myself if I was in my 20s, I would say, not everybody is your competition.
Mm-hmm.
And be kind. Kindness is going to get you a lot further than winning or being the person who outdoes the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. What you think, Bryan?
Yeah, I've heard it. There's something that I'll tell parents as a family pastor. I'll see this new dad, and he's just exhausted. I mean, he's got bags under his eyes. He's just not. They're not sleeping, and they're just struggling. And I'll go, man, it's not gonna last forever. This, I think I heard. There's a famous, really famous clip of a similar thing from Tom Hanks talking to a bunch of actors. This too shall pass. That's what I'll tell parents, that like you're up all night with this screaming kid, and you're exhausted, and deep down you're like, I really wish this baby would stop crying, and you feel terrible for thinking that, because like, I'm supposed to be this good parent and love this kid, but I really just want it to stop crying. You're not a terrible person, for starters. You're like everyone else who thinks that, and it's not going to last forever. It's gonna pass. You're gonna make it. As difficult as whatever it is that you're going through, I promise you're gonna be all right. We think this pain or this struggle is going to last forever. It's not. Neither is your success either. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
You start thinking, oh, things are good. Hey, this too shall pass. Right?